They fought against proportional representation, campaign finance reform, civil liberties, and they're still fighting against these things. They're fighting against every bit of political democracy and every bit of economic democracy that benefits the people. So why do you credit the capitalists with the gains that you made against the capitalists? Why do you credit the people who fought tooth and nail and claw and fang against every one of these things, who are still fighting, who are still rolling it back, doing it right here in British Columbia, as you know, fighting against, trying to degrade our standard of living? Every democratic victory we've made is under siege, continually fighting to drag us back to 1900. Why do we credit them with giving us a good standard of living? If they had their way, our kids would be working in those factories 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. Credit yourselves, brothers and sisters. So when we say that capitalism works or doesn't work, we must specify for whom. In one important sense, it's incorrect to say that capitalism doesn't work well in third world nations. For the capitalists, it works much better in Indonesia than it does in Denmark. The rate of profit and capital accumulation per dollar invested in Indonesia is 4, 5, 6, 10 times higher than it is in Denmark. Obviously, if you can pay people 15 cents an hour, 12 cents an hour, instead of having to pay them, as in Denmark, with benefits and all that, many, many dollars an hour, you're going to be making much more money. The public sector is smaller. Regulations are less or non-existent or very poorly enforced than they are in, say, the Western European or North American countries. Their goal is the third worldization of everywhere. That's the goal of finance, international finance, corporate capitalism, the third worldization of everywhere. Their goal is to get us back to 1900. I, as a corporate capitalist, every dollar I've got to spend on stupid, annoying, frivolous, unnecessary things like wages and health insurance and pensions and occupational safety and environmental protection. Every dollar I've got to spend on something idiotic like that is one less dollar for me. When will it stop? When will my oppression stop? Now you want seniority rights, now you want collective bargaining, now you want vacations, now you want paid vacations. When will this stop? Until you drag me into total poverty, until I have nothing left on my estates? Okay. So capitalism worked much better. Capitalism worked much better for the capitalists in the United States and Canada in 1902 than in 2002. And that's why they're trying to get us back there. Okay. Now, the people of the world don't necessarily take this expropriation of their land, their labor, their markets, their natural resources. They don't take it with a happy smile. They're often represented that way as smiling, just playing music a lot. But they fight back. They organize. For centuries, they have been fighting against this imperial colonial expropriation. And for centuries, the European powers have been murdering them and killing them and using state-sponsored terrorism. For centuries, the European powers, and then later on the North American powers and Japan, went in there and expropriated the land, the labor, the natural resources of Asia, Africa, Latin America. And they went in there because those countries were not poor, they were rich. You don't go to poor countries to make money. You go to rich countries. They went in there for the hemp, the flax, the cotton, the copper, the coffee, the iron, the diamonds, the gold, the oil, the oil. Can I say that 3 times? Okay. They were rich countries, and they still are, many of them, rich countries. Only the people are poor. The countries are rich. And you look then at the Middle East, and you see this terrorism emerging that's called, well, these countries have been the object of state-sponsored terrorism for generations. And the global system of U.S. global imperialism has destroyed democratic and popular reform movements in Pakistan, in Turkey, in Syria, in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in Yemen, in Iran, in Iraq, and in Afghanistan. Popular democratic movements in country after country destroyed. And so what do the young people have left? People who look and see their societies being destroyed, their cultures being undermined. They move toward a religious totality. They move toward an apocalyptic confrontation. They decide they must attack the demon who's doing this. Lacking a class analysis, they think in terms of national units. It's not the United States, it's not the Americans who are doing this to them. It's the ruling interests in America who are doing this to them, and they're doing it also to us Americans back in the States, I can tell you. Let's look at Afghanistan. Well, the U.S. has convinced the U.S. public that Afghanistan was a war to stop Soviet aggression. In fact, the Afghan government was a left military government that took over against a rightist government that was purging the left. And then it found itself under siege from Pakistan, from surrogate forces from Pakistan and from the CIA, and moved into Afghanistan. That government was targeted. That government was doing unacceptable things. That government was doing what the Torrijos government in Panama had been doing, what the Nul Jewel government in Grenada had been doing, what the Sandinista government in Nicaragua had been doing, what today the Hugo Chavez government in Venezuela is trying to do. That government was indulging in land reform, putting in minimum wage laws, legalized labor unions in Afghanistan, put up public education programs for boys and girls, which was an unusual thing, and the like. That was the Soviet-supported government. The Soviets came in after repeated requests by that left military, and then came this very ugly war. That government was doing what the United States leaders will not tolerate anywhere. They will not tolerate any government in the world that is attempting an alternative system outside of the globalization process, outside of that system of U.S. multinational, transnational, global finance capitalism. Outside, even another capitalist country that's trying economic nationalism and developing itself on its own terms, even that will no longer be tolerated. That was tolerated. When there was a Soviet Union, that was tolerated. When there was a Soviet Union, Yugoslavia was tolerated. It was a country that was a buffer against the Soviets. It was independent of the Soviets, often critical of them, but it also was socialist. With the overthrow of the Soviet Union, the ruling interests in Western capitalism have come to certain realizations. We don't have to make any kind of social contract with our own working class anymore. We don't have to turn to you and say, you see how much better you live than the people over in Russia? We don't have to say that anymore. We won. We're rolling back in Russia. In fact, after the overthrow of the Soviet Union, there was a very querulous note that began to appear in many right-wing publications. It went as follows. If now in the former communist countries we're having total free market deregulation and takeover and privatization, Why must we still tolerate here in our own countries, why must we still tolerate social programs and public ownership and regulation and the like? We don't have to tolerate that anymore. And you workers, you can forget about lifelong seniority or job security, whatever else. You got nowhere else to go. You can go turn any color you want, red, pink, whatever else, but there's no Soviet menace anymore there. You don't have a base. You don't have a global base anymore. And they could turn to the third world countries that they were giving aid to and saying, we're going to build you up and build a prosperous middle class and make you a little bit more like Western Europe or North America so that you will not be tempted to go communist, and which means go socialist. Want to keep you capitalist, but a kind of a capitalism with a human face. Well, capitalism with a human face is now capitalism in your face. And they don't have to do that anymore. They don't have to tolerate even a right-wing nationalist country that has any kind of economic nationalism. Let's take Iraq. Now, here's a hidden fact about Iraq. This is a secret fact. It's a secret in America. It's a secret on the U.S. media. It's a secret in all the pundit talk shows. It's a secret among our national official leaders. It's never mentioned. But Saddam Hussein was put in power in Iraq by the CIA. He was sponsored by the U.S. His task was to stop the Iraqi democratic revolution. And he did that. He destroyed the Kurdish Democratic Party. He destroyed the Iraqi Communist Party, which was a reformist coalition party, coalition building party. He even slaughtered and executed the left wing of his own Ba'athist party. He was Washington's boy. They loved him. They gave him aid. They built those chemical and bacteriological factories that he had in Iraq. That's another secret that you're not told. It was the U.S. that not only knew about this C&B warfare, that's come out in the press. It seems certain U.S. leaders knew that Saddam Hussein had chemical and bacteriological weaponry back during the Iraq-Iran war. They knew about it. Of course they knew about it. They gave it to him. They gave him the technology. That's another secret that's never told. So he was Washington's baby boy. They loved him. Fair-haired boy. Until he got out of line. Until he got out of line on oil prices. Until he started showing himself to be an economic nationalist. He didn't turn Iraq into a comprador client state and say, come on in, boys, it's all yours, take it, any terms you want, pay them any wages you want, don't worry about anything, no public services, none of that stuff, you take what you want on the terms that are totally favorable to you, just make sure you give me something. He didn't do what leaders did in Turkey and other parts of Africa and Latin America and whatever else. Instead, he became an economic nationalist. He started public education programs. He started public health services. Iraq, before 1991, had the highest standard of living in the Middle East. That was destroyed by a president named George Bush, George the First.